Hello guys, this is your friend. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto build own harem with Tsunami, Tsunade, Mikoto, Ayame, Anko, Karin, Hana, Temari, Tsume, Tayuya, Shizune, Kin, Hinata, and Kurenai, Part 5. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start a new fanfic. Naruto raced through the trees, a frown set on his face as he chased behind the albino teen from Oto. He could still remember Tayuya's words of warning before he set out. Kimimaro was fanatically devoted to Orochimaru, and he would do anything for the snake Sannin. Kimimaro was also ridiculously strong and quite the capable warrior. The redhead had told him that Kimimaro had destroyed all 4 of Orochimaru's bodyguards in a fight at once, and Tayuya still had the scars to prove it. Naruto didn't want to fight someone like that in an enclosed space, so he wasn't racing ahead of Kimimaro. He knew he was faster than the albino bone wielder. Finally, Kimimaro came to a clearing and Naruto put on a burst of speed. He had both boots of the outfit Mikoto gave him on top of the barrel. He forced it down to the ground by pushing with his legs, making the barrel that Sasuke was in slam into the ground. Naruto landed in front of Kimimaro, eyes set on the passive face of the bone wielder. I can't let you take Sasuke Tem to Orochimaru. His mother would be distraught. Naruto said, standing to his full height, dressed in the black Anbu uniform with his mother's sword at his side and the Kusanagi at his back. He was decked out with several scrolls and equipment pouches. He would need every advantage in this fight, he was sure. Kimimaro regarded the blonde annoyance in front of him. It would seem I will have to deal with you. Orochimaru-sama has already had to swap bodies, and I am tasked with taking Sasuke-sama to Orochimaru-sama. Kimimaro kept his face completely blank. He was surprised at the other members who were dispatched to find Sasuke, all of them having failed to kill the group of brats. Kimimaro slashed his hands through the air, and fired the bones of his fingertips out with pinpoint accuracy and amazing speed. He then followed the attack by charging at the blonde. His fingertips bled from firing off the bones of his fingers like that. Naruto dodged to the side of the white projectiles, drawing his mother's sword from his hip as he blocked against Kimimaro's attack, a spin kick that would have caught Naruto in the head. Naruto spun to the side, and swiped at the older teen with his sword, enhancing the edge with wind chakra. He caused the sword to dig deep into Kimimaro's arm, bleeding the older teen. Kimimaro looked down at his wounded arm. He could practically feel his bone fusing back together from the rather successful cut. Wind chakra seemed to be rather powerful, or perhaps it was just the blonde he was facing. He glanced to the barrel that contained Sasuke. It would seem I will have to take you more seriously, he said and bent his knees, crossing his arms over his chest. This is the first dance. Dance of the Willow, he said as bones ripped from his flesh at his shoulders, his elbows, his palms, and his knees. Blood dripped from them and soaked his clothes as he rushed at Naruto. Naruto parried the first attack, a swipe from the palm aimed for his face. Naruto spun, dodging the second swipe from a knee at his chest. Naruto was analyzing Kimimaro's movements, each and every one of them were precise and unpredictable. Naruto ducked down under a slash from Kimimaro's elbow, before he drove his palm into Kimimaro's sternum. Kimimaro spun, swinging his arms around and finishing with a spin kick at the blonde, all the attacks dodged or blocked. Kimimaro would give the blonde credit, he was rather skilled. To be forced to use this against such trash. Kimimaro said as his shoulder gave a jerk. He reached up and grabbed the shoulder bone, his chakra modifying it as he pulled it from his body into a sword. Second dance. Dance of the Camellia, he said before rushing at the blonde, weaving an intricate dance with his sword. Naruto brought up his sword and parried and blocked the complex attacks. Some were where he blocked, some were not, and it was causing problems for Naruto. He knew he was faster than Kimimaro, and he had proved the albino could bleed at the very least without Kimimaro using his own abilities. Even now, Naruto could see the blood dripping down along Kimimaro's sword. Still, Naruto was taking the bone user quite seriously. He was dangerous. Naruto would give the older teen that much and then some. Naruto popped the guard off of his mother's sword and flicked it up, deflecting another one of Kimimaro's attacks, catching the second sword in his other hand as he spun and broke Kimimaro's sword, slicing through it with his wind chakra. Kimimaro looked at the broken blade of his bone and dropped it before his shoulder jerked once more and he pulled out another. My Kekkei Genkai allows for me to manipulate the calcium in my body, allowing for the growth and regrowth of my bones at my will. I can also harden them to the point they are as strong as diamonds. It would appear that you are worthy of me using this trait. Kimimaro said. Naruto narrowed his eyes a bit. Enough talk, he said and dashed ahead, weaving his own intricate dance of sword play, forcing Kimimaro back as Naruto ducked, dodged, spun and slashed. Kimimaro kept up with every slash though, showing that his reactions were top-notch, even if his speed was less than Naruto's own. As Kimimaro was backed up, still blocking and parrying the blonde in front of him, he felt a coughing fit come on that he barely managed to suppress. The blonde nuisance was proving to be an actually skilled and upcoming shinobi. The problem was that Kimimaro didn't have much time left. Eventually, his body would decay that not even his own will, fueled by his desire to serve Orochimaru, would be enough to push forward. If only Kabuto could have healed him a bit more. Naruto leapt back just as Kimimaro gave a wet coughing sound and his breathing was getting heavier. Naruto's nose picked up a slight scent of blood, no doubt from Kimimaro coughing it up. Tsume also mentioned Kimimaro's illness, something wrong with his lungs. Naruto felt bad, knowing Kimimaro was essentially a cripple fighting for the will of his lord. Naruto thought he was ready for the darker aspects of the shinobi world, yet this was something else. Naruto gripped his mother's swords tighter. Damn it, this went against everything that he believed in. Naruto hung his head, realizing that was somewhat hypocritical given some of the things he had done. Give up. Naruto told the albino. Please, we can take you to Konoha. Tsunade is there and she can heal you, she's the best damned medic in the world. Naruto said, his body still tight with the readiness to fight. I do not need your pity. Kimimaro said as he stood up straight once more and wiped the blood away on the sleeve of his top. His head turned as the barrel began to hiss, signaling that it would finish with the Uchiha soon. Kimimaro stood taller, and tapped into the power of his cursed seal, causing it to begin to spread. His breathing felt easier, even though he knew that was an illusion. It would only speed up his injuries. For Orochimaru-sama, I will fight on to deliver Sasuke-sama. Naruto was reminded briefly of Haku. Naruto rolled his shoulders a bit. So be it, Kimimaro-san. Naruto said and combined his mother's swords back together again. He then took the kusanagi in hand, holding both of the swords in a firm grip but with a loose stance. Third dance, Uzumaki Naruto, Dance of the Larch. Bones began to sprout from Kimimaro's skin, tearing the shirt more and causing blood to spill out. The biggest significant problem with his Kekkei Genkai, the Shikatsumiku, was that the users were anemic. It was what accelerated his disease, using his abilities for Orochimaru. Because he was bleeding quite a bit based on the opponent, even his white blood cells spilled out. Having a rare blood type also made things difficult. Kabuto had difficulty finding a possible transfusion. The cursed seal from Orochimaru helped in this regard a little bit. It allowed for a minor healing factor, healing the damage as he did it. But the mark would only do so much. Kimimaro needed to end this battle. He rushed ahead at Naruto and began his wild and chaotic attacks, spinning and slashing at the blonde. He would give the blonde shinobi this, better men than he had been finished before Kimimaro reached the third dance. Naruto grew bothered by this. Despite his speed and strength, he was having difficulty keeping up with Kimimaro. This changed when Kimimaro suddenly leapt back into a back flip. Naruto saw Lee, trying for the standard flying kick. Naruto raced past Lee, and summoned his chakra to flow through his coils and into his blades. Naruto slashed out with both, releasing a stream of wind chakra that launched the sharp blades out like lethal projectiles. Kimimaro leapt to the side, no doubt trying to keep what blood he had in his body. Suddenly the barrel that had Sasuke began to exude black smoke that reeked of evil chakra. Naruto actually covered his nose and his eyes became slit and red from the kyuubi. He was pissed, he had no idea why. The top of the barrel exploded and Sasuke leapt out, landing. Through the smoke, Naruto could see long hair that was quickly receding back into his head. Sasuke! Naruto yelled out, his voice amplified by his fury. Instead of responding, Sasuke glanced to Kimimaro. Keep going the direction that you are facing to reach Orochimaru-sama. Kimimaro said before stepping forward, ready to fight once more. Lee, can you fight? Naruto asked sharply to the green spandex-clad boy beside him. Of course Naruto-kun, Tsunade-sama's treatment worked wonderfully. Lee said bouncing on his heels a bit, no doubt keeping his muscles warmed up and loosened. Naruto nodded. Step behind me, he said before unfurling a scroll. Sasuke was running off, and Naruto needed to deal with Kimimaro. He unsealed the contents of the scroll and soaking wet sand began to pour out, raining water and sand down on Kimimaro who was dodging. Naruto recently got the idea from Ikibi. Sabaku Sotaiso, Naruto shouted, using the sand to grab Kimimaro. This wouldn't stop the second stage of the cursed mark, but damned if he didn't try to make Lee's job easier. Naruto slammed his hands on the ground, pulsing his chakra out. The wet sand formed a large pyramid before condensing in size, crushing Kimimaro. Naruto then froze the water into a thick set of ice mirrors that interwove with the sand. Naruto glanced to Lee. It won't hold him for long, but he should waste a lot of chakra getting out. Naruto said before sprinting off after Sasuke, the Kyuubi's chakra actually making him faster but his anger more potent. Naruto paused momentarily, feeling the taint of evil chakra flare as Kimimaro broke free. Naruto glanced back behind him. Be safe, Lee. He whispered softly. Did he feel bad about leaving a friend to possibly die? Yes, he did. Every instinct screamed for him to turn around and go help Lee. But Kakashi had never told Naruto what to do when both options were necessary to save a friend, a comrade in arms. Naruto put on a burst of speed, gritting his teeth. He would return Sasuke no matter what. He would destroy Orochimaru himself to get Sasuke back if necessary. Naruto had promised Mikoto to bring him back. Naruto burst through a small clearing of rocks and landed on the head of Hashirama Senju at the Valley of the End. He could see Sasuke across the valley on the head of Madara Uchiha. Sasuke! Naruto barked out in anger at his friend. Sasuke slowly turned around, turning to his left side. Naruto could see his friend's Sharingan blazing. He then saw the tainted markings of the cursed mark on Sasuke's right half of his body, even changing the color of his Sharingan to gold. Naruto! Sasuke said with a smirk. Cut the power off, Sasuke. It's revolting, Naruto said in a cold tone. When Sasuke didn't do so, Naruto spoke up. So this is it, Sasuke? Naruto asked. Just abandon everything you've ever been taught just for power to kill Itachi? Sasuke shook his head. Nothing else matters to me but killing Itachi. Sasuke shouted. What about your mother, Sasuke? Naruto shouted. Does she not matter? Does the only member of your family that you have left not matter to you anymore? What sort of bastard son are you that you'd abandon even your mother? Sasuke's head lowered some. I can't ask my mother to support me in this, he said softly. She'd be picking between her two sons. How can I ask her to support me? Sasuke raised his head. But it doesn't matter. You couldn't possibly understand. Naruto threw open his arms. How could I? Naruto said. I never had the family that you had. I was a bastard orphan that no one, and I do mean no one, actually wanted around. In fact, the only person that did care for me was the Sandaime Hokage. Do you remember what happened to him? Naruto shouted. He could see Sasuke wince, remembering who exactly killed the Sandaime Hokage. Every time I look up, you're slowly drawing further and further ahead, Naruto. Sasuke clenched his hand into a fist. I can't keep being left behind. How can I gain the power to kill my brother when all I had to compare myself was you? You who defeated Haku, you who defeated Gaara, you who stole his way through the second exams. You brought back Tsunade-sama, you were trained by Jiraiya-sama. Why is it always you? Naruto watched Sasuke for a moment and lowered his head before sighing. Because I already had more power than I knew what to do with. Naruto said and stood straight and tall. Jiraiya of the Sannin is a seal master. Naruto was better, but that was beside the point at the moment. And I hold something back that is sealed in my very person. 14 years ago, the Biju known as the Kyuubi no Yoko attacked Konoha. The Yondaime Hokage didn't kill the beast like everyone says. Naruto unzipped the jacket and raised the fishnet. He sealed it away, inside me. He said and pulsed his chakra to the seal, making it appear. Jiraiya, being a seal master, is the only one with the knowledge to actually maintain the seal so that the Kyuubi never breaks free. Naruto could see the shock on Sasuke's face, and that shock allowed the cursed mark to fade away. Why you? Why did the Yondaime pick you for the sealing? Because I am an Uzumaki, because I was born that day, because I was an orphan by the time of the attack, that no one would care if I was sealed with the Biju or not. Naruto said and shook his head. My mother died shortly after childbirth, and my father died that same day as well. I am one of the last members of a proud clan with special chakra that enhances our lifespan. Only an Uzumaki could hold the Kyuubi. Naruto was proud of his parents, of his lineage, but he also knew that he couldn't just tell that to Sasuke. He was already telling an S-ranked secret. He wasn't about to say something that was so classified it didn't exist. Sasuke clenched his fists tight. Fight me, he shouted out. Maybe he did act like an impudent child from time to time, angry that he wasn't getting his way, but he needed this. He needed to see where he was at compared to his friend. Fight me, Naruto, fight me seriously. Naruto sighed softly and reached up, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew what it would mean to fight Sasuke seriously. Very well, Naruto whispered softly before he re-zipped the vest of the Anbu outfit. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed before he opened them with the Rinnegan blazing. His hand reached up for the Kusanagi. He drew the lethal long sword and slashed out, cutting through the waterfall and forcing it to part with his wind element, slashing all the way over to Sasuke with the unwieldy power. He resheathed the sword when Sasuke dodged. Sasuke dove off of Madara's head, not wanting any of that lethal slash that Naruto threw his way. He rolled out of the way, on top of the water, just as Naruto jumped down with an axe kick that launched the water 20 feet in the air. Sasuke, using his Sharingan, could see that on the point of impact, Naruto released a buildup of massive amounts of chakra. Such control was unheard of to the young Uchiha. It couldn't be possible that Naruto had that much power hidden latent. Naruto turned around, hands already flying through hand seals. Sensatsu Susho, Naruto shouted, stomping on the water and forming the 1,000-long projectiles that tried to spear Sasuke. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Sasuke called out, blowing out a stream of fire at the water that tried to skewer him. He winced as he felt one still pierce his leg, and he fell onto the water, just barely able to stand. Naruto froze the water that he felt on Sasuke's leg, stopping the bleeding and forcing Sasuke's leg into the same position, whether he wanted it to be that way or not. Sasuke glanced down to his frozen leg, only the chakra flowing through it and his other leg kept him afloat the water. He punched the ice, fracturing it to let himself up. He then leapt away from Naruto, sticking to the waterfall, something that was surprisingly difficult, but he would manage. Kaden. Hosenka no Jutsu. He blew out each of the small fireballs at Naruto, throwing some shuriken attached to wires at the same time. He would force Naruto to take him seriously. Naruto used the Kusanagi to block the fireballs. He was momentarily distracted at the clang of metal by the first one, and spun past the second one, he felt ninja wire wrap around him, tightening up and forcing him to look at Sasuke. Sasuke flew through some hand seals. His Chidori training helped him. Kaden. Ruka no Jutsu. He shouted, blowing onto the wires, the fire jutsu racing down along the wires in the shape of some twisted dragon of hell. He had only one stronger fire jutsu. Naruto felt momentary distress at the sight of the roaring dragon coming right at him. He flexed his hands. Shinra Tensai. He shouted, blasting away the fire, the wires, the shuriken, and the water around him in a powerful blast of repelling energy. Sasuke's eyes went momentarily wide as he realized that Naruto had even more power. Sasuke's budding danger senses, honed by Kakashi's training with the Chidori, caught something and he leapt away, moments before a blast of wood erupted from the waterfall he had been standing on. His head turned to the blonde who was crouched with his palms on the water. Naruto felt calm, even as he used the Mukten Jutsu. Naruto flipped through one-handed seals on both hands before stomping his foot down, not even calling out his jutsu as the thousands of needles looked to skewer Sasuke. Naruto wasn't content enough with that. He needed to beat his friend and his comrade down. He needed to drop Sasuke hard enough that he would never do this again. Naruto lashed out with his chakra, feeling the sand and silt all around him, even as Sasuke threw a kunai at him. With a roar, Naruto brought all the sand into the air, bringing it around him like a shield before shuriken shot off from the sand, aiming at Sasuke. Sasuke was fast enough and nimble enough to dodge the wet sand, but that was all Naruto wanted. Heavy black chains, his chakra-destructive chains, launched out from the waterfall, whipping at Sasuke like mighty metal serpents. Sasuke felt fear, he felt anger, he felt despair, no doubt exactly what Itachi had demanded him to feel all those years ago. Sweet Kami, was this the full might of Naruto's power? He felt like an ant in comparison, like some sort of pressure was forcing itself down on his feet, making them like lead. Are you so weak, Sasuke-kun? Kukuku, I would have thought that Itachi's little brother would do better. Sasuke had no idea who the voice belonged to, but he could feel the rage inside boiling up. Perhaps it will be Naruto-kun to kill Itachi. He is after the blonde. Sasuke grit his teeth and clenched his fists tight. Use my power. Sever your weak bonds and show the blonde your true power. Sasuke touched the mark on his neck. He had been injected with some formula after Orochimaru's bodyguards had offered him power. It was hard to ignore the allure of power, especially since he needed to get revenge on Itachi. Wait, revenge? Sasuke tapped into the power of the seal. Yes, revenge, that's what he wanted. The power began to flow through his veins and his chakra coils. He felt his wounded leg heal quickly. Black flame-like markings spread across his face. Kaden. Sasuke was about to inhale and blow out the fire when he realized something. Naruto was no longer there. Sasuke leapt away at the last second before an axe kick would have split him in half. It did send a crack upwards through the statue of Hashirama. Naruto turned with a back fist that Sasuke ducked under, and his fist slammed into the shins of Hashirama, breaking more stone away. Naruto rolled through his taijutsu, slipping into snake style, striking fast at Sasuke's curse-marked body. No more jutsu. Naruto would just beat the hell out of Sasuke until he gave up. Sasuke was fast. He prided himself on this fact and that he was even fast enough for the Chidori. But like when he fought against Lee before the exams, Sasuke was forced to admit that he wasn't the fastest. Worst yet was the fact that Naruto's moves were so misplaced it was impossible to counter. It's like seeing Naruto charging in for a shoulder tackle, and before he does that he snaps into a complex taijutsu move that Sasuke couldn't counter or copy. He couldn't see it coming because it was simply too fast. Sasuke rolled under Naruto's leg before another thunderous axe kick split the ground. Sasuke stood up, panting a bit and looking at the blonde's back. Sasuke watched as Naruto cracked his neck. Naruto was still toying with Sasuke. He could have destroyed him in an instant, could have knocked him out at any point he wanted to and completed his mission. Why then did he continue to toy with Sasuke? Naruto didn't know. Naruto turned on his heel and watched Sasuke, his eyes cold. He felt nothing about this battle. Naruto had nothing to prove by beating Sasuke. In fact, the only tie he could really say he had to this fight was keeping a promise to Mikoto and to keeping Orochimaru from getting Sasuke's body. Kyuubi's chakra wasn't even flowing through him anymore. Naruto cracked his knuckles, flexing his fingers to do so as he stared at Sasuke's eyes. Sasuke stared at Naruto's eyes, his breathing getting shallow and his pulse quickening. Why did the blonde's eyes remind him so much of Itachi's eyes? He could feel his fear building and he felt a slight emptiness. It was worse than Zabuza's killing intent, all those months ago. Still need more power, don't you, Sasuke-kun? Cuckoo, draw upon the second stage, show your enemy why they are but a stepping stone in your path to greatness. That voice was in his head once more. Perhaps it was even deeper than before. Sasuke shuddered as he tapped into the cursed seal more, actually letting it flow through his very being. Naruto felt even more dispassionate about the fight even as Sasuke collapsed onto the ground, clutching his neck. His skin turned to a sickly brown color of all things. His sclerae turned black, even as he bore the Sharingan. His lips were a dark blue color. Naruto shook his head looking at the star-shaped black mark in the center of Sasuke's face. It was a perfect bullseye point. Naruto was briefly surprised at the sight of the wings that ripped from Sasuke's back. That would have him at a slight disadvantage. Not even close to enough of a disadvantage to give Sasuke the win though. Sasuke got back up on his feet. He was a good 10 feet away from Naruto. He flipped through 3 hand signs and generated the chakra at his hand, black electricity starting to generate around his hand. Chidori! He screamed out, racing along the ground as his jutsu gave a screeching sound so true to its name. Naruto shook his head, noting how Sasuke had used his wings to generate some force to push himself along with. Naruto dodged the Chidori, spinning around Sasuke's form. An axe kick to Sasuke's spine drove the other boy down. Naruto ground his foot into Sasuke's spine, getting the boy to let out a groan of pain. I've had enough of this bullshit, Sasuke. Naruto said and stepped up onto Sasuke's back and grabbed the wings. Naruto growled out as he began to pull on them, getting Sasuke to squirm and scream in obvious pain. Naruto heart-popping sounds and soon the wings lay limp, the muscles literally pulled apart. Naruto his fist back, before he drove it into Sasuke's head, making the Uchiha's face bounce off the rock, knocking him out. Naruto shook his hand briefly before he looked at the cursed seal. He knelt down and touched it, already forming a key seal in his mind. The medic in his mind, made by the large amount of medical jutsu he could perform, was already figuring a way to withdraw the enzymes that kept Orochimaru's influence over the bearer of the seal. In 10 minutes, Naruto unlocked the seal and destroyed the enzymes. He hefted Sasuke's form, his reverted form, and started the long march back to Konoha. Eventually, Naruto met up with Kakashi and Pakun, who silently turned and followed Naruto as the blonde walked. Naruto paused when they got to a forest of bones and sand. Given that Naruto didn't see a skewered form of Leer Gaara, Naruto deduced Gaara had been there by the sheer amount of sand. Naruto figured that they had already started heading back. Naruto kept going, coming across the form of some nameless wannabe that was crushed under logs, the logs split with wind chakra. Naruto visited each and every battlefield of the Oto Nin that had attacked, with the exception of one. But that was because Kiba had taken that guy off a cliff. Naruto eventually made it back to Konoha and he took Sasuke right to the hospital. Sasuke was taken to a room with Anbu guards around it. Naruto sighed and plopped down next to Shikamaru, who was twiddling his thumbs waiting. Naruto inclined his head to Temari, who no doubt had been dispatched to help out. Naruto would have to deal with her soon enough. Choji? Naruto asked Shikamaru, jerking his head to the they were in front of. Yeah, Shikamaru said. Neji was brought in. I heard it was bad. In fact, I think Kiba and Akamaru are the only ones still conscious that got badly injured. Naruto looked down to Shikamaru's broken finger and stood up. Well, I know a thing or two about medical jutsu. Let me go see if I can help. Naruto headed into the ER. Some raised and muffled voices later, and soon there was nothing, worrying Shikamaru some more. Naruto walked out about 20 minutes later, looking strained. Not no Shika, Naruto said and took off down the halls, going to Neji's room. He had important orders. The operations were delicate procedures, both of them. Shizune and Tsunade were both doing their absolute best with some of the best medics helping. Naruto was essentially useless to both of them except for one thing. Naruto was a massive source of chakra, and he could be a battery of sorts for 6 different medic nin at once. Naruto walked out first of all the medics from Neji's room, seeing Hiashi and Hinata there. He wiped the sweat off his face for a moment, keeping his face blank. I'm not the one to be asking. Shizune Nichan will be out in a moment, Naruto said before walking away. Naruto found an empty bench and just sat in it. He heard a slight clacking sound and turned his head to look at Jiraiya. Good job, Gaki, the Sannin said and sat down beside him. Thanks, I suppose, Naruto said and rubbed his face a bit. So how's your first S-ranked mission success feel? Jiraiya asked somewhat amused. S-ranked? Naruto asked incredulously. The most he had was an A- ranked, which had been the wave. Jiraiya nodded. Originally, it had been an A- ranked, Loa mind you. Group of enemy nin, and Oto is most assuredly an enemy, coupled with the fact that you were retrieving a clan heir. Throw in who said clan heir was being kidnapped by, and the official story will be that he was kidnapped, as well as the fact that the enemy had reinforcements. You have the makings for an S-ranked mission. Jiraiya clapped Naruto on the back. So good job. Naruto held his face in his hand. Whoa, he said and shook his head. It kind of just feels surreal to be honest with you, he said. Jiraiya nodded and clapped Naruto on his shoulder again. Well, enjoy the downtime. Everyone gets a mandatory 2-week vacation after an S-ranked mission. Naruto looked up to Jiraiya. How do you know about all the details though? He asked. Jiraiya looked back to Naruto. Already talked to the Nara kid, he said before heading off. Naruto shook his head, barely able to believe what he did. He looked up at the ceiling and sighed softly before giving a grin. It all worked out pretty well, no one but the enemy died. Naruto stood in Tsunade's office, giving his own additional information to the debriefing taking place. After all, only he had chased down and beaten Sasuke into the ground. Sasuke surprisingly had torn back muscles, who knew that the damage from Naruto ripping at the wings would translate through. Tsunade listened as the blonde finished his report. She pinched the bridge of her nose. I know at least what happened to my grandfather's statue and why it has a big ass crack in it, she said with a sigh. She looked at her fellow blonde. There are some who don't want to list this as an S-ranked mission. Shikamaru is among them surprisingly. Something about the records making it harder for him to slack off. Naruto shrugged a bit. Truth be told, I don't care what you label it as. Everyone got home relatively safety, the enemy was beaten soundly. Naruto rolled his eyes at the unintentional pun the same time Tsunade did. And best of all, Orochimaru doesn't have his Uchiha body lying around to train. Tsunade nodded before thinking about things. Given the circumstance, we'll list it as an A- ranked. It will be cheaper on the village to pay the retrieval group an A- ranked mission pay, and the support B ranked support mission pay. It may seem cheap of me to do, but we're still working on getting the village back on its feet. Rebuilding from a war is slow progress. Naruto shrugged a bit. Sounds good to me. To be honest, I feel bad about that Kimimaro guy, he reminded me so much of Haku it was scary. Except that Orochimaru didn't seem to really care about him. Tsunade nodded. The last of the Kagaya clan died out. That's actually upsetting if you think about it. Despite their violent ways, they were still a clan of the ninja world. Naruto nodded before offering her a wry smirk. So was the Uzumaki clan Tsunade. He said softly and crossed his arms over his chest. But we're still alive and kicking. There might be some Kage out there. Just then a figure burst through Tsunade's door and Naruto turned, seeing Tayuya panting heavily, her long hair draping in front of her eyes. She grabbed the blonde and pulled him into a tight embrace with a heavy kiss on his lips, complete with tongue. Tsunade felt her eyebrow twitching and her desk cracked where she gripped it a little tightly. Must not kill redhead, she thought as she saw the redhead's tongue probing Naruto's tonsils. If you're done, Tayuya-san, Tsunade said through gritted teeth. I was about to finish with a debriefing. Tayuya pulled back from the blonde's lips. Shut up, you old bat, she said before looking at Naruto and resting her head on his chest. Don't scare me like that again, dipshit, please, ever, she said softly. She had genuinely been afraid when she found out that Naruto had fought against Kimimaro, even up to the dance of the larch. The Sound 4 had to tap into their cursed mark level 2 to stand up against the dance of the larch. Naruto touched Tayuya's back and gently stroked her spine. I'm sorry, Tayuya-chan, he said softly. Go home, I'll be there soon, he told her and watched her leave to go home before turning his attention back to Tsunade. Naruto offered a slight shrug at her pissed-off look. He was worried she would blow holes in her desk from how hard she was thrumming her fingers across the wood. Tsunade sighed and shook her head. Dismissed, Naruto, we'll get your payment to you soon. There wasn't anything else to talk about. Naruto offered a salute before heading out and going home. While he wanted to finish what Tayuya started earlier, at the moment he needed a shower and a hot meal. He got into his shower and turned it on to full blast. He waited for the hot water to pour out by stripping from his clothes. He got under the blast of water and sighed, rubbing the tense muscles of his neck. Naruto soon scrubbed the grime of the mission off and headed out to his living room in just a towel. He looked at the couch before passing it up for the kitchen. He boiled some water and made about 6 cups of instant ramen. He took them to the living room and set them on the coffee table before sitting on the couch. He looked up to the ceiling. That mission could have been one great big. Naruto shuddered, thinking about what he would have done had he not been thrown into this game. He would have likely ended up tapping into the Kyuubi's power, spamming clones against Kimimaro. Naruto shook his head softly. He had won. He got Sasuke out of there. He started to dig into the ramen, enjoying the hot broth and noodle goodness. This was the way to his heart, right through his stomach after a rough mission. Naruto was on cup 6 when someone knocked at his door. He glanced over at it and adjusted his towel, making sure it was fitting snug. It's open, he called out. Having Ikibi and Temari on one side, Karin, and Tayuya on the other, Naruto got used to them coming over, but they knocked first, so he always told them it was open. Instead of one of the few he expect, Mikoto walked in and closed the door, walking quickly over to Naruto and hugging him, straddling his waist at the same time as his face was pressed into her wonderful cleavage. Thank you, Naruto-kun, thank you for getting my son back, she said softly. Naruto glanced up and noticed the redness of Mikoto's face. She had been crying. He reached up and cupped her cheek. I promised I would bring him back, Mikoto-chan. I hope I can talk some sense into him, but he is obsessing over Itachi. Mikoto nodded before slipping from the blonde's lap, carefully, and sat beside him, leaning against him a bit. Naruto wrapped an arm around Mikoto's shoulders and drew her into a better hug, holding her contently as he just thought about everything that had happened. He felt her shake a bit, and Naruto gently stroked her raven hair back. Don't worry, we brought him home, Naruto said softly and kissed the top of her head as he continued to hold her in the silence. Mikoto slowly calmed down and her eyes closed for a moment. She tilted her head up and kissed the blonde that had saved her baby boy. She slipped her tongue between his lips, kissing him deeply and passionately. She tried to convey all of her thanks into that single kiss. She just hoped that Naruto got it. Naruto gave a soft groan. He always enjoyed the taste of Mikoto when she kissed him. He slipped his tongue along hers, working it against hers in an erotic dance. Mikoto pulled back eventually. She didn't want to be quite out of breath just yet. She bit her plump lip and reached into Naruto's towel, enjoying the feel of his thickness playing against her hand. She wrapped her hand around his semi-flaccid form and began to pump, feeling his harden. I want to thank you properly, Naruto-kun. She whispered in a huskier tone. She always felt so damned good around the blonde. But I have my own duties to attend to, so I'll make it quick. Mikoto leaned her head down and took the tip of Naruto's, gifted to him by the Kyuubi, staring down at her. It was erotic. Fugaku had never turned his on for this purpose. Naruto wanted to memorize this. He wanted to memorize each and every bob of her head that Mikoto performed, slowly working his into her mouth and deeper yet into her throat. Naruto gripped his thighs a bit, moaning loudly at her work. Mikoto-chan, Naruto said in a huskier tone of his own. Her sucking on his always felt good. Mikoto felt a bit of pride swell in her chest, knowing not everyone could get Naruto to react the way she did. She began to bob her head on and off of his, slowly working her lips up and down, taking him deeper and deeper. Soon her lips pressed around the base of his and off and get in the blonde's lap and ride him until she was sore. She steeled herself and took him deep once more, her hand reaching up and cupping his sack. Naruto leaned his head back a little bit as he felt Mikoto sucking on him more firmly, with renewed vigor like she was trying to make him blow. Feeling her squeeze and massage his balls was also a heavenly feel in itself. Naruto gave a low groan, feeling Mikoto pull off his balls. He even swore under his breath. Mikoto reached up and began to pump Naruto's. Come on, Naruto-kun, she whispered ever so softly. Give it to me, I want it so much. She said softly before she took his tip into her mouth and sucked with all the pleasant sensations she could give. She even stroked her tongue against the bottom edge of the head of his, tasting how he felt. She could taste the pre-cum building up, and she was swallowing her own saliva. Naruto let out a loud moan of pure pleasure, and his hips bucked up against Mikoto's mouth. His balls swelled for a moment before he released, flooding her mouth and throat with his sizable amount of cum. Despite this though, Mikoto was a champ who swallowed every last drop without letting a single bit spill. She pulled off, breathing heavily. Oh! Mikoto panted, savoring the salty taste still on her face. She sat on her knees for a moment and rubbed her thighs, desperate to force away the feeling of need. She wanted so badly to Naruto, to ride him until he shouted her name and blew a thick wad of cum inside of her. Mikoto stood up and smiled seductively to Naruto. Come see me again, hopefully we can work out some time that we'll both have Naruto-kun, and I'll thank you properly. She said and turned away, walking to the door with a sway to her hips. Naruto blatantly stared at Mikoto's curved, his M still rock hard. Damn it, why did she have to be busy the one time he managed to find some downtime from work and training? Mikoto flipped her hair over her shoulder and turned her head to look at Naruto. Oh, and, if you do, she eased the tight-fitting shinobi pants down over her hips, showing off her and the dark blue thong she was wearing that dug into the flesh of her skin quite pleasantly. You'll get to see a lot more. Mikoto pulled her pants back up over her hips and sashayed her way out. Naruto growled and bit into his knuckle, trying to get the pain of his desire down. Hell, he muttered as he stood up, heading back to the shower. Whereas last time he had let it beat down on him as hot as possible, this time he had the water on as cold as possible. Mikoto was a tease and he loved it. Naruto eventually calmed down and was laying in his bed, just enjoying a bit of time to relax. He was also thinking quite a bit, something he had been doing quite a bit lately. He needed a bigger place to live. 3 apartments were fine, for the time being, but he was no doubt going to need more room. He glanced at the book and moved it between his fingers a bit. Who could have made such a thing? Why him? He sighed a moment and set the book back in his nightstand. So many questions, too few answers. Naruto put his hand on his face. Whether he liked it or not, he had a moral dilemma also. Temari was something he needed to work out. He still got angry, thinking of her essentially raping him. Hell, their villages were allies. At the time, she could have probably asked him for it, explained the situation, and he would have given it to her. Naruto punched the wall, careful not to use Tsunade's super strength. That was something he didn't need to try and explain, or fix. As with Kurenai, he had made an example of Temari. He had a momentary feeling of weakness that could spell disaster for those that were close to him, and thinking of Ayame, Mikoto, Tsunade, Shizune, Tayuya, Kin, Hana, Tsume, Karin, Aikibi, even some of his classmates, the thought of them getting hurt, it made his anger boil up. But unlike Kurenai, Temari didn't have a reprieve from his anger. She was still suffering. Naruto dragged his hand down his face and looked up to the ceiling of the room. He was going to take care of it, he had to let go. Maybe when they were done, he and Temari could start over again. Then there were a variety of personal projects that Naruto was working on, chief among them a way to send a message over long distances near instantaneously. An hour was too slow, and it seemed the further away most of the things he worked with went, then the longer it too. It could literally revolutionize communications among the shinobi nations, not just the 5 great ones but also among the multitude of smaller ones such as Kusa, Aim, Taki, even Hoshi was in there. Naruto nestled his face into his pillow. Tomorrow he would deal with Temari and then he would put forth as much effort as possible into making a seal that would let him speak over long distances. He didn't want people to be too worried about him, and he had given Koyuki the Hiraishin Kunai. He didn't want to answer thinking an emergency was popping up only to find out she called upon him just to talk or have. Naruto seriously doubted that Koyuki would be the last to receive his kunai, both literally and figuratively. The next morning, Naruto woke up to the smell of something delicious cooking. He stood up and got dressed, heading out to see the Aikibi swaying as she cooked, her tail swishing in the air as well. "Morning Naruto-kun," she said quite cheerfully as she cooked some eggs. Naruto went over to the Biju and hugged her from behind. "Morning," he said and held her from behind. Naruto turned and watched as Temari silently did the dishes in just the maid outfit, the same tight one that the Aikibi had made her wear that her threatened to pop out of. Naruto silently sighed against Aikibi's skin. "Temari, go take a quick shower, we're about to eat and you're eating with us." Naruto said. "Yes Naruto-sama," Temari said a bit meekly. It must have galled her to do so, but she was still his slave, not the other way around. She turned and headed to take a shower. "I need your help with something Ichihi-chan," Naruto said softly and continued to hold his demonic lover. "Of course Naruto-kun," she said and turned in his arms, her tail moving the skillet off the heat. "I need to get over my anger at Temari in one fell swoop. I can't have anything left of it," Naruto said, looking up at the slightly taller female. The buxom blonde nodded, thinking for a moment and biting her lip softly. "Well, you could translate all that anger into a drive and just pound her into a wall, spank her, pull on her hair, and even tie her up. Be a little rough with her." Naruto thought about that for a moment before looking at the mischievous golden eyes of Aikibi. "You're going to be right beside me doing it, aren't you?" "Absolutely," Aikibi said cheerfully, bouncing on her heels a little bit, making her generous assets bounce a bit. Naruto thought on what Aikibi was saying. Could he translate his anger into Temari as hard as possible? He thought it had merit. It was essentially what he did to Kurenai. Naruto sat at the table and Aikibi dished up 3 plates of the scrambled eggs and bacon. What they would be doing would require energy, so they would be doing it after they ate. Temari came out, dressed once more in the maid outfit and sat down across from Naruto while Aikibi sat beside him. They ate in relative silence, something that was just fine with Naruto. After all, They would be making some noise soon enough. Naruto finished last and went to his couch, sitting down on it. Come here, Temari, he said simply. Yes, Naruto-sama, Temari said and walked towards Naruto with a sense of trepidation, like she was walking towards her doom. Still, she was a proud and unbroken kunoichi, she wouldn't back down. Naruto looked up at Temari, right in her eyes for a while. I'm still angry, he said bluntly and straight to the point as he felt Aikibi's hands run over his shoulders before rubbing the tight muscles. I'm still pissed off at what you did, actually raping me. Naruto shook his head, but I can't keep holding on to that anger, so I'm going to translate it into something else. Temari swallowed a bit. I understand, Naruto-sama, she said softly. She was prepared for the blonde's wrath, to feel his fist smacking into her over and over. She would take the punishment with stoicism. Once I'm done though, you're free to go home. Naruto said simply. Your clothes and tools will be returned to you and you can head home to Tsunade and we will put this behind us. I'm going to you as hard as I can, and Aikibi is going to help. Temari swallowed again. She could see the predatory look in the Aikibi's eyes, and the amusement. But she would get to go home. Her heart swelled in her chest. Naruto wasn't a bad person, simply human. She was grateful to have a second chance with the blonde. Kneel, Naruto said as Aikibi walked over and sat beside him. He felt Aikibi's hands work on his pants, pulling out his. He watched the Biju lick her lips in anticipation. Temari sank in and crawled on hands and knees over to the pair, between Naruto's legs. There was plenty of room for what she planned. She leaned up and began to lap at Naruto's balls. Aikibi gave a bit of a shudder as Naruto her a little faster. Oh thank you, she whispered and kissed Naruto on the shoulder. Temari's soft hair brushing against her thighs just made the sensation even better. She knew exactly what Temari was doing, and she thought it was kind of hot. Naruto gave a soft grunt. Temari was really testing his control. He shifted his hold on Aikibi a bit, holding her with one hand and smacking her with the other. He thrust a little harder inside of her, biting her neck again, making the Biju moan out in pleasure. Temari moved a little higher and took one testicle into her mouth and rolled the sensitive organ around with her tongue. She enjoyed the taste of Naruto's skin, she enjoyed the tightness of his sack. She may not get to taste his cum, but she would be damned if she didn't contribute to his orgasm. Aikibi wasn't going to be the only one allowed to do that. Aikibi rocked her hips downwards into Naruto's thrusts, giving soft sounds of pleasure as her was spanked over and over again. She moved one hand from around Naruto's neck to her and leaned back a bit, squeezing her nipple, scraping it to cause more pleasure. Naruto shuddered and paused as he felt Temari ever so slightly press down on his testicle with her teeth. It didn't hurt, it actually felt quite pleasant. He soon began to rock his hips a bit more, adjusting his hands to hold at Aikibi's spine and he leaned his head down and licked along the blue markings, over the areola of her nipple that was taut with her need. Aikibi rocked her hips against Naruto's, trying to get him to her more. Damn it, Temari-chan, she whined a little bit. She couldn't blame the blonde Suna girl, after all Aikibi had been doing far worse than distracting Naruto. But Aikibi was so close, the coil of her orgasm was at its very tightest, and she was so close to being sent over the edge but it just wasn't happening. Temari smirked a little bit before she took the second testicle in her mouth, holding Naruto's balls in her mouth and sucking on them gently. She could feel every little twitch they gave as Naruto no doubt felt his orgasm building and he was keeping it back for as long as possible. That wouldn't do in her opinion. She began to suck a little harder, rolling her tongue over his balls. Naruto pulled back from Aikibi's nipple and grit his teeth. Oh, he said and thrust faster into Aikibi's mouth, feeling Temari's mouth pull on his balls a bit as she sucked. It wasn't painful, it was quite a sensation. Naruto moaned out, arching his back as he pumped into Aikibi's body. Aikibi jerked a bit in Naruto's arms. The warmth of his cum spilling inside of her set off her orgasm and she squirmed in his arms as she let out a loud and long moan. She wrapped her arms around Naruto's neck, both of them, and pulled herself up to him, kissing him on the mouth, her tongue working into his mouth. She then pulled off of his before making her way to the couch to sit down. Temari stood up in front of Naruto a moment. She bit her lip before she hugged the blonde. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You're right, I could have just asked and explained what was happening. It wasn't the shinobi way of doing things, but given she spent 2.5 months at the mercy of Aikibi, she would rather have just asked." Naruto patted Temari on the back. "You're fine, Temari-chan. You're also free," he said and bit his thumb. He swiped his blood across a seal on the back of Temari's neck that acted as a collar so she could be traced. The seal broke, freeing her. Temari touched her neck a bit before looking to Naruto. "Thank you. Perhaps we could do this again sometime. It'll take me a bit of time to get everything together to leave, so would you mind if I continued to live next door?" Naruto shook his head. "Not at all, Temari-chan. But you might want to go get a shower before heading off to do stuff." "I'm using my own." Naruto turned and headed to take a shower. Aikibi got up and followed, grabbing Naruto on the "So big boy, can I join you?" she asked, biting his earlobe. Naruto rolled his eyes a bit. "No, Ichi-chan, you can't join me. We'll never get done by the time the hot water runs out." He slapped her on the nass. "Besides, you had plenty. And he was tired from having 5 orgasms." Naruto closed the door behind him and started the shower up, stepping in and letting the hot water beat down on him. He made the shower quick and he dried off before walking out. Naruto watched Aikibi walk in, an obvious sway to her hips. "Last chance, Naruto-kun," she said seductively before she started the water. Naruto really wanted to go into the shower with her until she couldn't move, but damn it, he needed to rest a little bit. He grabbed the book from his nightstand and flipped it open, going to the level up page. "Congratulations. You had with the Aikibi no Tanuki plus 2500 PTS. Congratulations. You had with Sabaku no Temari plus 1100 PTS. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Revenge Medal plus 750 PTS, plus 5 demonic chakra levels." Naruto banked the level up he got. "Congratulations. You received the Bronze Blondes Do It Better Medal plus 750 PTS. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Repetition Medal plus 900 PTS. Congratulations. You received the Bronze 3x3 Medal plus 1000 PTS. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Charitable Medal plus 500 PTS, plus 5 Divine Chakra levels. Congratulations. You received the Bronze Sand Sirens Medal plus 1500 points, plus 5 skill points. That was a new one for Naruto, but he banked the second level up. Naruto headed to the medals page. Revenge. Bronze. Dominate one woman that has dominated you before. Blondes do it better. Bronze. Have with 2 different blondes at the same time. Repetition. Have with 6 different women on more than one occasion. Naruto counted them off. Tsunami, Ayame, Mikoto, Karin, Kin, Aikibi, and now Temari. It made sense to him. 3x3. Bronze. Have 3 threesomes with different women. Charitable. Bronze. Orgasm 5 times during a with 2 women or greater. Naruto looked at the last medal he received. Sand Sirens. Bronze. Have with 2 of the 6 women from Tsunade at the same time. Naruto then headed over to the stats page. He had 20 stat points to work with. 5 from leveling up to level 33, 5 from leveling up to 34, 5 from the perk that gave him an additional 5 every 2 levels, and then 5 from the Sand Princess's medal. Naruto put 5 into his intelligence, 10 into his strength, and then 5 into his reflexes. Naruto went to the skills page. He had 187 points to work with, more than plenty for what he had in mind. 15 points went into Kenjutsu, leveling up that to master level. Sword God or Sword Demon. Naruto tapped Sword God. Your skills with Kenjutsu allow you to use all manner of blades like they are an extension of yourself. You can become familiar with styles of a sword by just looking at it and holding it. Naruto tapped Sword Demon. Your skills with Kenjutsu are refined and lethal. You can cut a god down if they step in your path. Using an unfamiliar sword lowers your Kenjutsu skill by 50 points, while using one that is familiar will raise your Kenjutsu skill by 50 points. This was a rather difficult choice for Naruto. On one hand, he wasn't sure if he would use another sword besides the Kusanagi or his mother's sword, and that by taking the Sword Demon mutation, he would be even better with them. However, on the off chance he did get another sword, he would have to train extensively with it to learn it. Naruto got a coin and flipped it. Catching it out of the air, he slapped it onto his hand. Heads. Sword God it is, he said and selected Sword God. Naruto left Genjutsu alone. He would no doubt get that through some other means really quickly. Ninja Master got 90 points, bringing it up to Master level. Ninja Master or Ninja Assassin. Naruto tapped Ninja Master. Your body is honed and you barely waste any chakra as you launch off your techniques. Abilities using chakra gain an additional 10 points with use. Naruto tapped Ninja Assassin. You are like the wind, unseen but known. Abilities affected by Ninja Master skill that do not use chakra gain an additional 10 points with use. Naruto flipped a coin again. Heads. Ninja Master. He selected it quickly. 72 points left. Naruto skimmed through the skills and spotted one. It wasn't one for him, but rather for the girls. Naruto poured 80 points into it. Massaging. Apprentice level. Your massages can make a woman horny 25% of the time and feel good 75% of the time. Note. Medical Jutsu offers a 10% bonus to the massaging skill. Naruto snapped the book shut and put it away. He had one other thing to do before he could end things. He stood up and headed out towards the hospital. It didn't take him long to find Sakura, who was trying to gain access to Sasuke's room. Naruto stepped up beside Sakura and looked to the Anbu guard. What's the problem, Sakura? Naruto asked. The Anbu says I don't have clearance to go see Sasuke-kun. Sakura said. She looked over to the blonde. Naruto nodded for a moment. Not surprising. No offense, Sakura, but you're just a genin right now and you weren't part of the retrieval squad. He said before looking to the Anbu. Do I have clearance to enter? The ANBU's head turned to Naruto. You do, Chunin Uzumaki. You were in charge of the retrieval unit sent out for the patient as well as the one that brought him back. The Anbu stepped aside and let Naruto enter the room. Naruto glanced back at Sakura. Give it a few days, Sakura. Things like this take time. He said before he closed the door and headed over to Sasuke, who was awake. Dobi. Sasuke said simply while he watched the blonde sit down. His back still hurt like hell, and he no longer was hearing voices in his head. Naruto scratched his chin for a moment. You do know your stunt just bit you in the right. Tsunade isn't going to let you do a whole lot at the moment and you'll be under a whole lot of scrutiny. Sasuke sighed before nodding. I know. I don't know what came over me. I was beaten soundly by those 4 guys that came into the village. It looked like such a powerful thing they had. Naruto nodded for a moment. I want you to think on this for a moment, Sasuke. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's why we work in teams, so that we can take stronger opponents down together and one of the team doesn't get a big head. Naruto stood up. You need to apologize to your mom, and do something nice for her when you get the hell out of here. He then turned and started to walk away. Dobi. Naruto stopped. When I get strong enough to face off against Itachi, will you be there to watch my back? Naruto glanced over his shoulder at Sasuke. Count on it, Tem. Had Sasuke said, to kill Itachi, Naruto would have said no. But Sasuke wanted backup when he faced off against Itachi, something completely different. And I'm sure Sakura will be there to heal us up as well. Naruto then left the room, letting Sasuke to think. Naruto had his own stuff to do. End. Omake 1. Naruto left Genjutsu alone, he would no doubt get that through some other means really quickly. Ninja Master got 90 points, bringing it up to Master level. Hayabusa Ryu or Ezio Auditore da Firenze. Who the hell are these people? Naruto asked and shrugged. He flipped a coin again. Years after, the people of the elemental nations still talked about a white-garbed assassin who killed corrupt politicians and evil missing nin everywhere. Omake 2. Naruto scratched his chin for a moment. You do know your stunt just bit you in N right. Tsunade isn't going to let you do a whole lot at the moment and you'll be under a whole lot of scrutiny. Sasuke sighed before nodding. I know. I don't know what came over me. I was beaten soundly by those 4 guys that came into the village, it looked like such a powerful thing they had. Naruto nodded for a moment. I want you to think on this for a moment, Sasuke. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's why we work in teams, so that we can take stronger opponents down together and one of the team doesn't get a big head. Naruto stood up. You need to apologize to your mom, and do something nice for her when you get the hell out of here. He then turned and started to walk away. Though I suppose I could go see her and get her to thank me properly. Your mom has one tight tem, she really loves it when I treat her like a doby. Sasuke shouted as Naruto walked out, jerking against his restraints. I'll kill you. Naruto continued across the rooftops of Tanzuka Gai we're staying at. Tsunade had woken Jiraiya and Shizune before leaving while Naruto was out getting Jiraiyas in his packs. Thus, when he went around the quick method to find Jiraiya and Tsunade coming back from the hotel he and Jiraiya had stayed at, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizune had instead taken the long path to search for him so that they could leave the town quicker. Naruto ended up meeting them back at the first hotel that he and Jiraiya had stayed at, landing on the ground between the 3. Sorry, got turned around and lost. He said as he stood to his full height. He looked to Tsunade. I need to speak with you, privately, without Shizune or the pervert. Tsunade an eyebrow, somewhat amused. She sincerely hoped the blonde wasn't going to do something stupid. She noticed that Jiraiya hadn't moved, even though Shizune was already walking a path back to Konoha. Private conversation Jiraiya. Tsunade said. I just want to congratulate my cute little apprentice. Going after Tsunade so soon after meeting her. Jiraiya patted Naruto on the head. I knew I'd make a pervert out of you yet. Jiraiya said with a laugh. Naruto glared at Jiraiya, his Mangekyo Sharingan showing. I swear by the log if you are not moving in the next 10 seconds, I will use my extensive knowledge of the human anatomy to change you into a woman before using my Mangekyo Sharingan to give you the impression that you are a woman, not a man who had been forcefully turned into one. Naruto said simply. Tsunade crossed her arms under her bust. That was quite the threat. She had threatened Jiraiya with being turned into a woman before. The pervert said he would welcome it because that meant he could enter the female's side of the hot springs. And if that's not enough, Naruto continued. I will have you keep your qualities of a super pervert, only you will have the mindset of a woman. Jiraiya paled. His own godson and apprentice would turn him into a male-loving super pervert woman. Now, let's not be so hasty. Jiraiya said, backing up with his hands in front of his face, trying to have them in a placating manner. Naruto used a subtle Sharingan technique to make them appear to spin, the chain links of his Mangekyo making a nice effect. Jiraiya ran off after Shizune. Tsunade got a few chuckles before she looked to the blonde. Alright Gaki, lay it on me. Tsunade said, wanting to know exactly what happened that he needed to talk to her about. Do you feel stronger, more rejuvenated, more energy, even lessened effects of a hangover? Naruto asked suddenly. Tsunade rolled her shoulders a bit before shrugging. Sure, I suppose. I guess I do feel more spring to my step. Naruto nodded and sighed. Okay, here's the gist of the situation. Last night, during our private time, the Kyuubi was also drunk and she sent her chakra through me, into you. Tsunade's eyes went wide for a moment. I'm not about to explode, am I? She asked. Naruto shook his head. You got a minor dose and I acted as a filter. Besides, you're Uzumaki enough that you can hold back the Kyuubi's power in small doses. She sent it specifically to that seal. Naruto reached up and tapped it, surprising Tsunade. She claims that it is used for a regeneration technique you have. Tsunade nodded. It is. It stores chakra into it, and when I release it, the seal speeds up the process of cell division in my body to the point it can be considered regeneration. The problem with it is that it literally shaves off my lifespan. It's hard to say by how much each time I use it. It's a medical kinjutsu. Naruto nodded, understanding what she was saying. Kyuubi says that through the seal, she was able to affect your cells. She gave you years back on your life, how much I don't know. Tsunade ran a basic self-diagnostic on herself for a moment. I'd say 30 years have been given back to me. She said softly. She knew that her lifespan was greatly reduced through the effects of her jutsu. She would still likely live to see 100 now. The Uzumaki bloodline was a wonderful thing indeed, but with the 30 or so years she got back from the Kyuubi, she could honestly say she felt like she was back in her 30s. Tsunade then noticed the blonde fidgeting in front of her. What else? She asked. She almost dreaded the answer, but at the same time, she was almost hopeful. Naruto bit his lip. Well, you might, now this is a might we don't know, have the Mokuden. Naruto said. Tsunade watched Naruto for a moment. Mokuden? She asked. Mokuden. Naruto confirmed, nodding his head. Tsunade rubbed the back of her neck. Hell, I'll have to dig out Hashijiji's scrolls on the Mokuden then. She said softly. Anything else? Naruto shrugged a moment before stomping the ground, blasting a small crater around his foot. I got the feel of your super strength technique, as well as the Mokuden from the Kyuubi. Blame her. She was drunk last night too. Tsunade palmed her face for a moment. I've made worse decisions while drunk. She said and shook her head with a sigh. Okay, fair enough. Let's go Gaki before this day gets any stranger. Naruto turned and walked beside Tsunade for a while. It didn't take them more than 10 minutes to catch up to Jiraiya and Shizune. Tauntaun was in Shizune's arms, so the same went for the small pampered pig. Naruto could tell Tsunade was in thought, and if he could so soon after meeting the woman, then so did Jiraiya and Shizune. He needed to keep them both from thinking too much about why he would have needed to talk to Tsunade. He scratched his chin a bit. Hey Arrow Sennin, he noticed the slight twitch from Jiraiya. It was so easy to rile Jiraiya up. What are my chances of making Chunin when we get back? He asked. Tsunade perked up a little bit, hearing the question. She had heard the Chunin exams had happened. Even that the little blonde walking alongside the group had decimated his competition. She was going to have to look at the videos when she got back, see what had happened and all. She needed to see who deserved a promotion. Jiraiya scratched his chin. Well, I'm not sure, truth be told, and I'm not the Hokage who you should be sucking up to for the promotion. I'd say not answering a damned question on the first exam will hurt you, though Ibiki got a kick out of that for a little bit of time. Oh come on. That was such a bullshit test. Naruto shouted. Literally everyone but me had a method to cheat with. Hinata and Neji had their Byakugan, Tenten and Lee had the experience to do that mirror bullshit Ibiki called them out on at the end, Kiba had Akamaru, Shino had his bugs, Sakura was just that damn smart, Ino sat behind Sakura, Shikamaru is that smart, Choji got shadow possessed by Shikamaru, Naruto didn't know that last one for sure, but it was an educated guess, Sasuke had his Sharingan. The do I have? A giant N of chakra sealed in my stomach and shitloads of shadow clones that I can't make without them being noticed in an instant. Kakashi-sensei hasn't taught us anything about stealth and infiltration. Tsunade suppressed a faint smile at the blonde's words. He was quite smart to figure all of that out by himself, and while she didn't know any of the clans most of the people were part of, it wasn't hard to tell whom was part of what clan. And what did you do for the second test? She asked. Tsunade knew that it took place in the Forest of Death. It was part of why she wanted medics on every squad. Naruto shrugged. That I cheated off on. I picked Anko's pockets for the scrolls before the test even began. Then I just booked Mai to the tower with my team. Ji-san. Naruto winced at the name but swallowed the pain down. Ji-san said I was allowed to. He seemed to like that I thought outside the box. He said. Tsunade was a little thoughtful. Naruto did think outside of the box and he must have had some big balls to try something like that with Anko. She really would have to see the videos of the various matches. She wanted to see the blonde work a bit more under pressure. She would also talk to the various shinobi in Konoha and find out how he did under the duress of war. But Tsunade was also thinking about her newfound youth. If the Kyuubi gave Naruto the abilities he got by way of having a sample of chakra, then wouldn't he have gotten the Hyugas? Jiraiya told her who the blonde fought, and as a medic she knew that residual chakra would have been pumped into his system. She had discreetly, while scanning herself earlier, taken a sample of the Kyuubi's chakra, and while it seemed manipulative even on a DNA level, how else would she be younger? The chakra didn't seem potent enough to adjust DNA purely on a foreign chakra alone. Something else was going on and she damn sure didn't know what it was. Plus, even if the Kyuubi had been able to adjust DNA on a foreign chakra alone, it would need a sample of the chakra from someone with a Mangekyo Sharingan, which to her knowledge no one outside of Madara had obtained one. Even with Naruto's cover of Kyuubi having been controlled by Madara, it still wouldn't make any sense and the feel of the chakra wouldn't be enough. Tsunade was the best damned medic in the world, but she couldn't get a fix on how the blonde was gaining these abilities. She damn sure knew he hadn't been born with him. She didn't want to confront the blonde either until she had a damned good idea as to how he did it, and possibly proof as to how he did it. Tsunade went up to Naruto and put a hand on his head, scratching him on the top of his head, making him look up to her with a raised eyebrow. She wouldn't make mention of it until she had some proof. She liked the blonde though, she wouldn't tell him to stop. Not unless it was a security issue with the village. He was just getting stronger, and as a Hokage, who was she to stop one of her shinobi from doing so? If it became an issue though in the future, Tsunade would put her foot down on the matter. The trip back to Konoha was relatively uneventful other than occasional craters being blasted into the countryside when Tsunade helped train Naruto in her super strength technique. It was impressive that he was picking up on it, despite the fact he had such a deep well of chakra to attempt to control in his gut. It made her wonder how vigorously he trained to keep it up. As they made it back through the gates, Naruto looked to Jiraiya, almost begging to be let go to his own devices. The white-haired super pervert waved him off. Tsunade rolled her eyes as the blonde bundle of energy sprinted off. I envy the Gaki, he's got a date with a cute Hyuga girl, Jiraiya said as he walked alongside Shizune and Tsunade. Too young for my tastes, but I can tell she'll be quite the looker in later years. Tsunade momentarily felt jealous before she shoved the feeling down. She had just gotten drunk with the blonde and had an amazing night. She was probably his girlfriend or something. Tsunade frowned slightly, noticing Shizune looking slightly upset about the fact as well. Shizune hadn't. Tsunade thought about the facts. Her apprentice had, now that she really thought about it. This was an interesting facet to be thinking about. Polygamy wasn't unheard of, extremely uncommon but not unheard of. Was the blonde playing the women in his life? Tsunade tapped her foot a bit as she kept moving further through the village. She wanted to review a few things and ask those close to the blonde. It was asinine to think that his powers might stem from having with people. It couldn't be that, could it? Over the next few days, Naruto spent a great deal of time avoiding everyone he knew and had been intimate with. Word got out that he had a date with Hinata, and of course several of the others were asking where theirs was. Naruto hadn't even gone on his date with Hinata yet, and they were asking about them. It made things difficult. Of course, then there were those like Anko asking about the date, wanting details like when it was going to happen and such. Mikoto even seemed interested, trying to find out what was taking the blonde so long. It was about 10 days after they got back when an Anbu said that Tsunade was calling him to her office. He headed that way and was surprised to see Shikamaru beside him walking up. Any ideas? Naruto asked the genius. A few now that I've seen you. All of them troublesome, Shikamaru said in his usual sloth-like demeanor. When they entered Tsunade's office, Naruto was a bit surprised to see all the proctors for the Chunin exams as well as a few important Chunin. Anko offered a wave from the wall. Tsunade gave this speech about how they impressed several people. They showed tact, an ability to think outside the box, to plan ahead, even teamwork. Naruto was surprised when he was given his own Chunin vest. He stared at the flak vest with a bit of awe, holding it. Shikamaru muttered his signature word to himself before he slipped it on. Naruto rolled his eyes at the lazy genius before he clapped him on the shoulder. Don't worry about it, Shika. It's a good position, nothing too hard, and no boring D ranks. The blonde said as he walked out with Shikamaru. Yeah, but I didn't want promoted so soon. So damn troublesome, Shikamaru said. Gaki. Naruto felt his arm get grabbed by Anko. You're coming with me. She made use of the body flicker technique. Naruto felt his feet touch the ground at his apartment and was soon dragged inside by Anko and he was pushed onto the couch. Naruto glanced around, noting who all was there. Hana, Tsume, and Mikoto were over by his bedroom door, leaning against the wall. Karin, Kin, and Tayuya were behind him, leaning on the couch a bit. Ikibi sat on the arm of the couch, watching him. Anko, Shizune and Ayame were in front of him, watching him. Temari sat on the other arm of the couch, watching him. All eyes were on him. What? Naruto asked, looking at all of them. So when's your date going to be with the Hyuga girl? Anko asked, crossing her arms under her bust. So that was what this was about. Naruto offered a sigh and stood up. He held up one finger to Anko as he walked towards his bedroom. The girls all followed him, with Mikoto and Tsume entering his room before him with slight frowns on their faces. Why wouldn't he just answer the question? Naruto walked over to his closet with purposeful strides and slung the door open, revealing a sea of orange jumpsuits. And what would you like me to wear on the date? I think the date should be nicer than me wearing my shinobi garb. Naruto turned to his closet and pulled out one hanger. Orange jumpsuit. He tossed it onto the bed. Orange jumpsuit. He tossed the next one onto the bed. Orange jumpsuit. He tossed the next one. Orange jumpsuit. He tossed the fourth one onto the bed. Orange jumpsuit that I use for spare parts to patch the others. This one also joined the others on the bed. Naruto turned and leaned against his closet door. While he wouldn't treat the women in his life like shit, he wasn't about to be pushed around either, even by their show of force by all of them being in his room. I was a genin for the past 8 months, before that I was an orphan barely having any money to my name. All my bills came out of my monthly stipend that stopped when I got my headband. Naruto inhaled and exhaled slowly. One of those months, I was training for the Chunin exams, so I couldn't perform missions and bring in a whole lot of money. For about another 2 of those months, I was on 2 separate missions that didn't exactly bring me a whole lot of cash. Getting Tsunade back to the village wasn't exactly a paying mission because it was a necessity. Saving Wave didn't exactly pay a lot, having to be split between 3 genin and an elite jonin. Naruto was glad they were letting him speak and defend his position. I'm helping support Ichi-chan, Kin-chan, Tayuya-chan, Karin-chan, and Temari-chan. 3 apartments, plus utilities, are not cheap each month. The girls help, they really do, and I appreciate the fact, but all my savings went into getting the other 2 apartments so that we weren't trying to fit 6 people in this small apartment on a permanent basis. When I got back from getting Tsunade, all my money that I had won gambling went into paying off the apartments, the utilities, getting supplies that I had used during the month and a half I was gone for, getting food for the house once more. Not to mention for the past 10 days I've only been able to do the occasional mission because many of them are being snatched up due to the damage Odo did during the invasion. Naruto inhaled and exhaled. The fact of the matter is I have no money to buy something nicer to wear for my date with Hinata. I get charged more at shops, and while it's not as bad as it has been, it still happens usually when I go clothes shopping. Something relatively formal, but still casual, will cost me money, especially since I don't want to get something that's neon bright orange. I like orange, but for a date it's not that great of a color. I have enough money to take Hinata to a relatively nice restaurant. Naruto bobbed his foot up and down a bit, obviously agitated. He saw many of the faces turn a bit more sympathetic, some murderous at the idea of the blonde being overcharged for clothes. Tsume crossed her arms under her with a pronounced frown on her face. "And why didn't you ask any of us? We would be more than willing to help," she said. Inuzuka helped their pack mates and the blonde was technically her alpha still. Naruto looked away. "I hate being pitied," Naruto said simply. "I hate asking for handouts, I hate asking for charity, I hate getting charity," Naruto said as he moved over to the window and leaned against the frame, looking out over the village from his spot. It wasn't a great view, not really, but if he was going to be the Hokage someday then he had to love all of Konoha. Tsume tapped her foot a bit. She could understand where the blonde was coming from, she suppose.